everyone's delight, the Dogman movie has already been released, and it was a huge success. With a budget of only 40 million and nearly 90 million at the box office, the film is doing incredibly well. With that in mind, the obvious question arises. Dogman 2 is a real possibility. But if it happens, what will it be about? Before we start theorizing about what the next movie will adapt, we need to define what the first film covered from the comics. Dogman is a comic book series that has already reached its 13th book. That's right, if you thought it was a short story, you were completely mistaken. However, even though it's a massive series with multiple books, the stories tend to be quite simple, except for one complex aspect at the heart of it all. A typical Dogman story always involves Petey the cat coming up with some wild, over-the-top scheme to defeat the big dog, while another villain takes control and forces the two to team up against them. Simple, right? However, the complexity lies entirely in Petey's character, who has an incredibly emotional backstory involving his father, his troubled childhood in which he was betrayed by his friends, and, on top of all that, a clone he created who now calls him Dad. The movie depicted all of this, from the creation of Dogman to Petey's first steps toward redemption, when he sacrifices himself to protect his clone from the telepathic fish, Flippy. But the comics go far beyond that, with plenty more stories to tell and an ever-growing cast of villains. So grab your catnip, because today, we're diving into the Dogman comics to figure out what the next movie might be about, right here on Zigzag. The movie is a relatively loose adaptation of the first 3 Dogman volumes, bringing in only part of Petey's journey and his negligent father, Crud, as introduced in the book A Tale of Two Kitties. Following the narrative logic, the sequel would pick up from this point, beginning with Petey in prison, something that, by the way, also happens in the film. Once again, he manages to escape from the feline detention center at the end of the first movie. Just like in the third book, Petey starts to accept Lil Petey for who he is, without insisting that he follow the path of evil. However, in Dogman and Cat Kid, he goes back to trying, once again attempting to lure the kitten to the dark side. This time, Petey uses a direct argument: "You're my clone, so you're evil because you're just like me." This moment is crucial to the depth of Petey's character arc, because it carries a major irony. If a clone were truly identical to the original, and Lil Petey, still so young, feels no inclination toward evil, that means Petey also has goodness inside him. The difference is that he's gone through so many negative experiences that he ended up believing evil was his only option, and this belief has roots in his past. As a child, Petey was an exemplary scout, the kind who racked up awards for good deeds. But everything started to fall apart when Piggy, Crunky, and Bub betrayed him during a mission, a pivotal event that takes place in the book Lord of the Fleas. However, that was just the first crack in his heart. The true turning point, the one that made Petey become a villain, came later. Something so impactful that it led him to completely harden himself and, in the future, repeat the same mistake with someone else that had once been made against him. With this in mind, the next movie will certainly have to introduce this trio of villains, known as the Fleas. The group's leader is Piggy, who is probably the most beloved antagonist among fans of the series. Piggy is a completely unscrupulous pig who is even willing to build giant robots to destroy the city and wreak havoc. He also marks yet another instance of Dogman and Petey teaming up against a common enemy. If this makes you excited too, type #Dogman in the comments so we know. But the movie can't just be about this, because it would be too shallow and wouldn't be as fun and engaging as the first one managed to be. So we need to pull in another book from the sequence before dealing with other things from past books that were left out of the first movie. In the book, For Whom the Ball Rolls, Petey finally opens up to Lil Petey, and now fully recognizes him as his son. Naturally, he starts sharing his story, but not without some comedic interruptions, because Lil Petey just won't shut up and keeps interrupting the story with knock-knock jokes, where the punchline is always that something pooped on Petey's head. As he recalls his past, Petey realizes that the feeling of betrayal, which began with Piggy's actions during scout training, ended up becoming a recurring theme in his life. This feeling only intensified after his father, Crud, abandoned him and his mother when he was still a kitten, exactly the same age as Lil Petey is now. And this is the great sadness of the story. Petey started his life as a kind-hearted kitten, but the painful events of his childhood ended up shaping who he became, to the point where he created a clone of himself, only to later repeat the same mistake as his father and abandon him. Thus, this abandonment is not just a selfish act. In reality, it represents the moment when he left behind the best part of himself, that kindness that was smothered by the traumas he carried. However, in an unexpected way, that part was restored precisely by his own clone. In the end, this journey carries a powerful lesson. It's not the bad things that define us, but what we choose to do with them. But Petey's story is even darker than this, and we made a video telling the whole story. Just click on the card that popped up above, and this entire journey of acceptance can unfold while we watch Petey's giant robot cat fight against Piggy's giant robot Brontosaurus. It would be amazing to see this brought to life in a top-tier DreamWorks animation. I can't wait any longer, just like in the first movie, which takes various bits and pieces from different moments of the first 3 books to bring everything together in the conflict between Dogman, Petey, and Flippy. There's a lot of cool stuff that was left out of those stories that could help flesh out the plot of the next film. The first of these is that, in the second chapter of the first book, we learn that the mayor of the city is also a villain who wants to create an entire city dedicated to crime so she can make more money. The only obstacles in her way? Dogman and the chief of police. To achieve her goal, she hires a mad scientist to create a robotic police chief that follows all of her orders. They could use some part of this story to further develop Dogman's relationship with the chief, as well as the chief's romance with journalist Sarah Haydoff, which is also a really cool side plot in the comics. In the movie, they hinted at this plot in that scene where she yells at the chief, telling him to fire Dogman, but they didn't develop it much since the focus had to shift to Flippy. But in a new movie, they could mix Petey's escape at the beginning of this chapter with his drama involving Lil Petey and use this Robo-Chief story as the starting point for the main villain's next big problem, Piggy. So if you want to stay updated on all things Dogman, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. And your question is probably, okay, but why does all this have to happen? Why is Piggy such an important villain? And how does this evolve Petey's story? For a very simple reason. Remember how I said the story in the comics is simple? Piggy wants revenge on Petey because of their shared past. Because as soon as Petey was kicked out of the Scouts, his life lost all meaning, and then Petey got his revenge by reporting the Scouts for violence against cats, and feline activists literally canceled the entire Scout group. And that's why Piggy wants to get back at Petey, because their lives also lost purpose after they lost all their Scout badges. And now, Piggy wants to destroy something Petey loves, his clone, Lil Petey. This is the perfect motivation, because it brings Petey into the story with a personal reason to go up against the villain. And in the middle of their fight, the city pays the price. So Dogman also has to jump into the brawl. And another thing that would be great to see in this whole battle is the superhero duo that Dogman and Lil Petey form. They are completely useless, but absolutely hilarious, because they just keep striking hero poses in the middle of the fight without realizing what's happening around them. And if you want to know more about Dogman, we've prepared a video showing all the hidden references in the movie for you to watch. It's popping up on your screen right now. What's your favorite reference?